In this video, we're looking at the income statement within Power BI. And let's actually just set this up. We can see that we have January through to December. December doesn't have much activity in it yet, so we're just going to remove December. So we're looking at the first 11 months of, in this instance, 2022. This is a fictitious data set. So for 2022, we're looking at the first 11 months, and we're comparing it to the same period, first 11 months of 2021. So effectively, let's focus on this visual firstly. So what we're seeing here is we're comparing our actual, which is 2022's numbers, against our prior year, 2021 numbers, and we're looking at the absolute delta in this column here, and the percentage delta between both years. Next. In addition, we're looking at essentially the income statement, built out the way the client needs it presented for that client's requirements. And in this instance, we're looking at our revenue, then our gross margin, followed by our operating profit, and then lastly, our net income. And we've included both the net profit or net income percentage and indeed the gross margin percentage. Next. Now, as an aside, in order for us to be able to calculate the likes of gross margin, operating profit, and net income on the fly, and secondly, present the income statement in a manner in which the client wants it presented, which, depending on a client-by-client basis, it will vary radically. We've changed the model from what we normally like to use, which would be a star schema, into a snowflake model. And we've used a header table to allow us basically interrogate this information in a way that allows us to calculate our gross margin, operating profit, net income, and present it in the manner in which the client wants to see it. That's an aside. We'll go into that perhaps in more detail in another video. Next. Now again, keeping this very high level, just let's look at this. We can see that from a gross margin perspective, we have seen essentially margin compression of about 1.6%, or from a delta, almost 2.3% downturn in terms of margin compression. And without getting into the weeds at all, we can quickly see up here that, look, our revenue, we had a very healthy increase of almost 33% year over year. However, we had an even healthier, or indeed unhealthier, increase in our cost of sales because it's a cost center. This is a revenue center, cost center. And ultimately, that would explain the major part of the reason why we're seeing margin compression amounting to almost 1.6%. Next. Now, we built this income statement out to 3 levels of detail. We could go to 5 or 6 if we chose to, but then it gets too busy. So if we were to step into, say, revenue, we can say, okay, tell me a little bit more about revenue, please. And we can see that the build out of this 42.8 million is a combination of our gross sales, our return on adjustments, and our discounts. And further, if we said, I'd like to understand a little bit more about my gross sales, we can step down into that as well. So now we can see that mostly that was our trade sales, but we had a dollop of intercompany sales in addition. Let me just close this up. Next. Now, if we take it down to this visual down here, all we've done is said, look, I'd like to understand my actual income statement, not for the total year. I'd like to understand it on a month-by-month basis. And so therefore we've said, look, let's look at this I'll call it $8.6 million worth of profit, which is this puppy over here, and said, I'd like to understand that by time, please. And effectively what we've done is said, okay, so tell me, how are we doing from an income statement on a month-by-month basis? And we see the various metrics, how they're performing month over month. So this is just a deeper analysis of this number here, taking it into a monthly cadence. Next. And of course, because the cross-functionality of all of this stuff within Power BI, we could say, look, tell me a little bit more about my January activity. So what we're seeing here is we're focusing on this $1.7 million of the net income of $8.5 million. And up here we're saying, okay, we're comparing our January of 2022 against our January of 2021 and looking at the various deltas. Next. So currently we're just looking at the entire entity. But if we chose to, we'd actually like to step into more of a mini income statement look and feel. And the way we've done that based on this data set is to say, look, let's actually understand our income statement by region and by division, please. In effect, what we're doing over here is saying, look, it's nice that we know that we did 8.5 million, but I'd like to understand from a region perspective, I'd like to understand this US profit element, which amounted to the lion's share, almost ballpark, little over 50% of our sales was US operations. So if I was to select that, now what I'm doing is saying, look, we've actually stepped out of the $8.6 million worth of profit, and now we're just exploring the US operations region. And we're understanding it from it's the sales we made all the way down to the profit for 2022 against 2021. And we're looking at the monthly cadence for the US operation. And of course, we can do it. We can step it down to all of these various other regions. Next. Now, in addition, we can actually step it down to the next level of detail. I'm going to select this arrow here and say, look, tell me more about the US operations, please, because I'd like to understand if there's any divisions involved in this, generating this 4.5 million, I'd like to understand it. So basically, now everything has gone away apart from this $4.5 million worth of sales. And I'm trying to understand the build out from on a division by division basis of that same 4.5 million. And now I can say, look, let me understand better the central USA division that's sitting within the US operations region, please. And if I was to select it, I'm now going to understand a build out of this almost $1 million worth of profit, which I'm seeing here. And I'm comparing it to my prior year, which is highlighting a negative delta, which we can see over here, and a decrease of almost 27% in terms of our profit year over year. And down here, I'm looking at the monthly cadence, making up this total profit of 976,000. And if I chose to, I could say, tell me more about the US operation region, the central US division, but I'd like to understand maybe what happened in November, please. So I'm going to select November. And now I can see how we did November of 2022 against November of 2021, the delta and the delta percentage. Okay, next. So let's take it across to a slightly different cut of the same information. So again, over here, we're looking at our income statement, 2022 against 2021, looking at this 8.5 million and the deltas. And here we're looking at more of a time visual, but we've introduced an actual visual rather than stepped out of the matrix. And down here, we're looking at a split of this 8.5 million by region and then by division. So let's actually explore that in a little bit more detail. So if we chose to, we could say, look, tell me a little bit about what happened, say, in January. So I'm going to select my January numbers. And I can see I did 1.7 million in January of 2022 as against 1.4 of January 2021 at the deltas. In addition, I can see a build out of this 1.7 million for January of 2022. And I can see this down here, this 1.7 million. I can see on a region by region basis, the makeup of this 1.7 million, where we've done exceptionally well, in this instance, maybe on the US side of things for that month, and where we're struggling a little bit in terms of, say, maybe our Australian region. Next. And further, we can step this down into the next level. So if I chose to, I could say, look, I'd like to understand for January, looking at all of the regions, I want to understand January's profit. And I can see the lion's share of that was generated in the US region. So I'd like to step into the US region and understand what divisions might have made up that profit, please. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to select this arrow here, and I'm going to select the US operations. And by doing that, now I'm exploring the 912,000, which was the US region, but I'm understanding a breakdown or a build out of that on a division by division basis. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, let me just step that up. Next. Let's release January, so we're looking at the entire 8.6 million. Perhaps lastly, just on this particular page, is that we can say, look, tell me a little bit more about what happened, say, in the Canadian division. So I'm going to select the Canadian division. And what we've got here is we're looking at the 2.5 million of the 8.5 million total entity profit. And we're comparing our 11 months of 2022 against 2021 for the Canadian division. So we're exploring this 2.5 million here against prior year. And then we're looking at the actual monthly cadence from a profitability perspective. And if we chose to, we could say, look, I'm interested in what happened in September, please. So if I selected September, now I'm looking at, for the Canadian division, for September of 2022, I'm exploring this 160,000 and the negative delta of 141,000. So I can see my 160,000 here against a much higher prior year profit, giving us a negative delta of 141, or almost a little under 50% negative delta. And of course, and we'll see it perhaps in the next bit of this video, we can now start stepping into, at great detail, an explanation as to what has happened on a particular line or subline so that we really understand what's happening in the business. Next.